So, Jim, thank you for taking your time today to speak with me a little bit about the work of the Institute for Anatomical Research and what it is that you do, and specifically the dissection workshops, one of which I attended back in March. So,
Yay.
Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your title and your function there at the Institute?
Well, titles, boy, howdy, right? I think I wear a lot of hats at the lab. My title is the director of title is the director of the lab. And at a nonprofit, the senior executive is considered a director. And so I am the director there at the Institute for Anatomical Research. Um, my background is in traditional Chinese medicine and massage therapy. Actually, is where I started my work with the body and learning about the body, and I've taught in associate's degree programs for the last 20 something years. And that's kind of my background that kind of got me to the institute. Started out bringing students there, and then kind of found my way in working with the founder of the institute, who's Bonnie Thompson. And after starting out as a volunteer, I kind of worked my way up, and now I run the place.
And how long you been there?
So we're trying to think about that. I think I've been there 13 years
Mm.
now, something like that. Let's see. No, let's see. It is, I think 11 or 12 years, 11 or 12 years. Mm,
And how long has the Institute been around?
we've been around almost 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
About
yeah.
2010.
So they were around for about 2 or 3 years before I came on. And yeah, yeah.
Excellent. So let's talk about the dissection workshops. When people hear about a dissection workshop and the fact that I went to one, I sometimes get that eye roll and that really? And I'm sure that you probably get that kind of reaction when you tell people you run a lab and that you dissect cadavers. I mean, it's not really, dinner table conversation unless you're a doctor or you're in that line of work.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about that.
It is funny. Rarely, yeah, I don't get a lot of follow-up questions when I talk about my work. I get the right? Yeah, because it's not the usual fare. I think that we have a lot of um, thoughts around the whole thing, be that around death itself, or be that around what does that look like in terms of anatomical study, and then around sort of handling the death. And so I think for many people, it can be any one of those thought processes that sort of gets in their way of understanding what this work is. And our thought and our goal around it is to really sort of move that needle a little bit. I have to be honest with you. When I first started out, I was that person. When I was an instructor, I taught anatomy. I would actually con my colleagues into taking my students to the anatomy lab, because I was the same way. Like a lot of Americans, I'm like, death is very uncomfortable for me, and smells and all of that other stuff was also it may be gross to me. And so I was like, I had a buddy and he liked to go to the lab, and so whenever it was lab day, I sent my students with him. And so what happened one day was, actually, he was not there, and my other colleague had a group of students and she couldn't go to the lab for whatever reason. And so uh, I went because I was like, well, I couldn't send her, and so I had to sort of put on my big boy pants and go to the lab. And boy, I walked in there, and Bonnie was the instructor, the founder of the lab, and she revealed this body for us. And wow, it was a 2x4 upside my head in terms of, man, I talk about these things every day, these organs, these muscles, but I really didn't understand how they were layered and how they were put together and how they were integrated together, and so when I stood over the body and looked at it for the first time, it was such a revelation that this is anatomy, you know, and really understanding, really for the first time, I've been preaching the idea of integration and how the body all works together, but really seeing it for the first time was such a profound understanding for me that that was a big shift. And then getting involved in it, really have taken on that moniker of, because when I get a group of people in there, whether they're students that are maybe young students who are just learning anatomy and are just trying to understand the body, all the way up to medical professionals who have 30, 40 years in practice that come into the lab to look at it from that perspective, they're all changed in their understanding of how integrated and how connected and how that understanding is not brought forth in textbooks and posters, and that you really need to see a real human body. We have models now, they're made out of rubber that are okay, but still good, but they still don't show, how, oh, when this muscle degraded, fat filled into that space, and that changed the way it worked and the way it functions. And those of us that touch, live people who are living with disease processes every day, that's how you really understand it from there. And so for us, so for me, it's just become this almost a you know a I don't know. I really just want everybody to really be able to have that understanding of how our health choices affect every piece of our souls, from our feet to our ears, every thought, every movement, every lack of movement, everything we eat, all has an impact on our bodies. The story we tell a lot in the lab is that our bodies are always listening to you, that all our bodies have is the input that you give it. And so our bodies are listening to you and preparing them itself for the world that you're telling it is happening around it. And they're amazing at doing that, which is uh, I love the realization. um you know this is not just about learning the basic anatomy. This is about understanding how the body has used that anatomy, and how that body lives with the story that the person is putting into it. And so those stories we unveil every day have an impact on our practice, profoundly.
Right. So where do the cadavers come from?
So we work with a number of sources. We have a direct donor program where we work with local funeral homes who know us and know who we are, and they work with local people who are interested in donating their bodies to procure them for us and bring them into us. So for us, sometimes our people are directly uh, from our local community. We also work with university sources to get our cadavers as well. So sometimes some of the larger procuring organizations, like the universities who have large programs, we will work with them directly and get donors through them as well.
So there's a cost to you too to bring in the donors, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it is a complex process, managing and taking care of, someone's loved one after they've passed, a donor who's come in. We have refrigeration, we have transportation, management in terms of all of that. And so, and we have to pay our procurement organizations because again, they have the same thing. They have refrigeration and transportation and different costs that they manage through that. So all of those costs are incurred through us and for managing the donors.
Right. So when a body comes in, or before a body comes in, what steps are taken to preserve it? Because a lot of people may not know anything about it. They just think, oh, the body's going to break down. So what's the preservation process
Oh,
like?
great question. So in our world, because there are two different ways in which we may utilize a body in the lab. In some cases, we're using bodies that are fixed, we call it, which means they've been embalmed. And so in that case, the body has been preserved with a chemical solution, and that allows for the tissues to be sort of locked in a certain way that allows for a different type of dissection. In some cases, also, we work with what we call unfixed or unpreserved bodies. And those bodies are dissected without or prepared without a solution. And those are frozen. And so we use a couple of different sources for that. So for bodies that are that we need for the prepared, we have them. They have it's called formalin. A lot of people think it's formaldehyde, which probably does have some formaldehyde in it. Usually these solutions are made with a bunch of different products in there. They're like humectants and emollients and fixatives and a variety of products that are designed to sort of lock in those tissues so that they're better for a long-term dissection. And those bodies, when the after they are procured from the family, are then prepared by the funeral home that way, and then we take them in and keep them cool until we use them in the classroom. The other bodies are taken in and they are frozen as quickly as possible. We try to lock down those tissues and we keep them frozen until we are ready to use them in the classroom, and then we take them out and prepare them in that way.
So you have about how many classes per month or per year?
It depends on the year, but we'll run somewhere around 20 of our extended classes. That's maybe 6 to 10 days where we're doing large groups of people, international groups come in and run those. And then we'll run another 20 or so, what we call maybe one-off classes, which is a one-day exploration. One of the things that we do in our lab, which is a little bit unique, is we have one or two donors that are prepared for multiple classes. So we do that dissection in house, and then we'll have multiple groups come in. So those are great for the MA classes, for the medical assistant classes, for the physician assistant classes, even the nurses classes sometimes use those pre-prepared. They'll look at those and get their anatomy sort of basics on our pre-prepared bodies, and then we'll have a cadaver ready for them so they can practice their techniques on. And so those one-offs could be up to maybe 20 or 30 of those classes a year. So it could be 60, 70 classes a year we're running through the lab.
That's a lot of bodies you have to have.
It we don't use in the way of the in the 20 or 30 one-offs, that's generally maybe one or two bodies that we're using for that, which is because that body's used over and over and over again. We keep them prepared in a way that we can do that. For the 20 6 and 10 days, it can be. So it can sometimes take us into the 20 and 30 cadavers per summer.
Wow, that's a lot. So a lot of refrigeration there.
The refrigeration is definitely a big part of what we do.
So you have,
For
I
sure.
suppose you have a backup generator in case the power goes out.
We do have backup generators and we have backup plans for if these things can go. Yeah, yep, we sure do.
Because nobody would think about that. You wouldn't want to come in and be greeted by an odor or so. I mean, I know it sounds gross,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
these things happen.
Well, these are things, right? And a lot of times you go into a profession with, I come into this profession as an educator,
Mhm.
who's somebody who knows the body and understands how to teach, understands how to set up a classroom. And so, sort of that's your expertise. And then very quickly when you start doing something, you have to learn about a whole bunch of other stuff that you never thought you would have to learn about, which is things like refrigeration. And
Exactly.
yeah, because what what it really does matter in the sense of making sure that that environment is a presentable and open offering. We really take pains in our lab to keep it clean and presentable in a way that is comfortable for the person. And We really titrate how we present even things like tools that we would use for dissection or things like that. So when the student comes in, it is an environment that is sort of uh, we've taken away some of the stuff that might look uncomfortable or be awkward. And smells, when you're talking about dealing with dead tissue, is really a thing that you have to manage. Both smells that include the dead tissue and smells that include the chemicals that we use to manage those. And
Mhm.
so I think it's important to try to keep that stuff down so that the student has can be there more for the experience of the anatomy
Mhm.
and learn in that environment and have less of that other stuff getting in the way of their
Right.
experience. So
So,
that's important to us.
right. So tell me a little more about procedures, policies, and best practices in case people are wondering. And in respecting the body, how do you respect the body, seeing that this is somebody's loved one?
One of the things for us is that is a pretty easy thing for us to follow
Mhm.
because so often our donors are people that we know or are connected to people that we know because we work with the local community. In our world, literally, I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, actually it would be more than that, about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. I met a gentleman. This was a local firefighter. He was a man who, when he was a young student, he went to a cadaver lab, and it changed his knowledge and changed his understanding of the body. And he went on to be a firefighter, 40 years on the crew, and he was always wanted to donate his body. He's like, I want to be a part of that experience for somebody else. So he found us. Him and his wife came to the lab. I had a lunch with him, and we met. We talked. We talked about his life, talked about his health, talked about all kinds of things. And then he's like, "Well, when I pass, I'm going to offer you my body, and I want to be a teacher there." And so a few years later, he was in his late 80s at that time. And maybe 4 or 5 years later, his wife gives me a call and she said he had passed. And she said that, we're going to get him set up for you. And I was like, great. I'm sorry to hear that he's passed. We're happy to take him. And, um, and she said, I got to tell you a story. She said, the whole time that he was, ill on his deathbed, she said all he could talk about was what's going to happen to him when he comes to the lab
Mhm.
and who's going to learn from him and what are they going to learn and what will they experience. She said he was very happy. She said it sort of changed his experience in those last days to think about being a teacher in our lab and we're very adamant about that. We call our donors the teachers because we feel like they're the tour guide, they're the teachers, we're just the tour guide, and they're the most valuable resource here in the lab. And a gentleman like that, I knew him, I met him, and I knew his desire to be a teacher there. And so for me, then what it becomes is not just a donor in my lab, but it becomes the value of honoring a dying person's wish and being able to carry that out. And so for me, then taking care of that donor through the lab experience becomes a very personal thing for me, and a very honored position. And so having that as not every donor do I have that close connection to. Some I like I said, I might not know them at all if they've come through a university source, but for me, I know that that donor is as valuable as the donor that I know. You know what I mean? There, I can extrapolate that connection there, and so we really take pride in moving that needle from this being a donor that's just a thing that we're learning from, and really exploring this human person's life. And granted, they're not there anymore, but their story is there, and their story is in that anatomy. We are less a lab that spends a lot of time learning basic anatomy like they would in a university setting, and a lab that is working with people who already work with people who already sort of have an understanding of anatomy and want to know that more. And then we're unveiling that story from that level. And so that really allows us to connect to that donor rather than it be this is a heart or this is a lung. In this is a heart and a lung that is part of the story of this person, and how did that then fit into that story, and how did that work that way? Because then I can extrapolate that story to the human, to the live person that I have in my clinic, and sort of make that same connection there. And that's how we sort of frame that whole anatomy experience. And then it then colors our whole work from the moment we bring that person in, or that body in, I should say, to the moment we work with that body through the process of dissection, to the moment then we collect that body back to bring it back to the funeral home so that it could be cremated as a whole. And then those ashes as a whole are then returned back to the family so that they can receive those ashes as a whole. And so for us, then it's really a ritual process that goes all the way through, that becomes a very valuable, very you know, uh uh I don't know, it's hard to explain, kind of way. Out of this light here a little bit. I live in I'm in a sunroom, and it's the sun is moving on me.
Okay. I know the feeling. So is there ever a body that you just would not take at all?
Oh, for sure, if there were objections from the family or things like that, those would be reasons why, we're interested in everybody being a part of the process, and agreeing to it. So that would be something that we would probably reject. There are logistical things that also can get in that way sometimes too, if perhaps the body was uh, maybe sometimes we have size requirements or things like that can get in our way because we only have certain levels of refrigeration and that. So sometimes those things can get in the way. Sometimes logistics in terms of location, and that might get in the way of being able to accept a body as well. So most of them are things like that. Otherwise, we're very interested in learning because we feel like, as clinicians, we see all people in the clinic. And so we want to have that same representation in the lab too, as well.
I see. So, how do you decompress after looking at the cadaver all day? Is it possible?
That's a great question. I have a hot tub, which I use freely. uh, it is a great place to, I think some water around you and some bubbles and a backyard with birds is really good. I have live animals. We were just talking about this earlier. I have 2 dogs and 3 cats, and they are wonderful for me to decompress. And just, it's good to be around fresh, live. And so for me, my backyard is really my sanctuary. We have bird feeders and a good cup of tea and my dogs and that's really it, or a little bit of time in nature. One of the beautiful things that we're lucky in that I live in Colorado Springs, which is, a really, really pretty place to be. And we have a lot of wide open spaces and mountains that we can walk around in and parks that we can get to. And so for me, it's getting out into those places and getting out of the stuffy lab and away from that and into green and that for
Right.
sure.
But would you ever give your body to science?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I again, being honest with you, when I first started at the lab, I had to think about it. I wasn't, I didn't know what my connection was to my own body after I'm done with it. That I was a little bit hesitant. Do I really want to donate my body? How do I feel about this? And I have changed that opinion over the years, and I'm like, because I believe in what we do, and I would donate my body to my institution, even though I would know it would be my friends picking through it. But because I believe in what we do in the lab and how we handle that whole situation. And so and frankly, you can't help but work with your own concepts of death when you're in a place like this or surrounded by it. You can't help but talk about these things, look at it, it's there in front of you. And so I have refined my own understanding of death and my own body and what that means to me and what I do, where I go when I'm not using this, you know, body system that I'm living in right now. And so as that refines, that's also helped me, sort of change that thought process too.
Can you tell me about rituals? When I was there, you had some rituals at the very beginning and end of each day.
So are you talking about the group kind of that
Yes.
thing? Yeah, I really feel that those two things. So one of the things that we do when we run a group class or an extended class, actually I do this even in my shorter classes, even if I'm doing a 3-hour tour, which is one of the things that we do. I always make sure that we have some time at the beginning of the class and some time at the end of the class to sort of connect with the whole situation. Because again, I think that there's a lot going on here that's beyond the anatomy study. There's a dead person in the room, and we have to connect with that and relate to that. And so creating a container for understanding what we're going to be doing standing around a dead body and learning from that is very important, I think, in sort of setting the tone for that. So all of my students, no matter what their age, even the young ones all the way to the old ones, we really take some time to sort of uh, create that container to talk about what we're going to be doing, to connect with the value of that donor, so that the students are not only, because we're nervous going into that situation. I think a lot of times, for many people that never been in a lab before, for many people that never even been around a dead person before, or if they have, it was a funeral and that was maybe somebody that they had grief about. And so that's a very different situation than we're going to be doing in the lab. And so we really take some time to sit with that and talk about that. Create, and we have certain topics. I have a certain outline that I run through to bring that to a walk that elephant into the middle of the room, if you will, and put everybody in a safe place so that they're comfortable
Yes.
with what they're about to do and comfortable with that, and and so that it makes that situation so much more inviting.
So I remember you read poems every day before we started. That was part of the ritual, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah, I love that. To me, anatomy study and going into the lab is such a left brain thing for us so often. It's a piece and parts and intellectual words and all of that, and so that is great and certainly one of the main objectives. But also, there's a right brain thing here, and I think that the anatomy lab, especially more so than reading an anatomy from a book, really brings in that right brain, that artistic brain, that whole picture brain. You're seeing the whole thing from it, and
Mhm.
stimulating that side. And so I love, having that poetry or a little bit of art or something to sort of wake up that right side and bring that right side into the situation, so that when we step into that lab, we're firing with both sides of the brain.
So do you have one poem that comes to mind?
You know, I love the Ode to Adipose poem. I think that everybody seems to really, love that one too as well. I mean, to me, all of them are, because each one is a sort of to me, they're gonna move back out of this sun again. It is just ah, glaring on me. Um, to me, each one, the poems that I read are each one kind of an ode to a different aspect of our body, whether it be the muscles or whether it be the adipose or the organs. And so to me, it's like a love letter to that part of the body, and I sort of read them in my own mind, um, at reading them as my own body, sort of as I am learning, like many of us are, to love my body. Sometimes I think we're adversarial to our bodies, especially if you have pain and things like that. And so part of the story we tell in the lab, and then I'm also learning my own self, is that. And so each one of those is a love letter to that. But I think the Ode to Adipose one is the one, for me, especially because we, as Americans, especially, and I think throughout the world, have a very adversarial relationship to, our fat in our bodies. And I'm not a thin guy, and so I carry around a little bit extra that maybe I'm not
Mhm.
always happy about. And so that poem really is connecting to sort of loving that layer and respecting that layer for the sensitive, beautiful layer that it is.
Okay. And at the end of each day, what was the ritual again?
So usually we usually do a debrief, which is again get back into that room a little bit and uh talk about kind of the experience of that day, which again, I think is great. It helps to sort of refine that container a little bit. And then usually I recommend that a person do some sort of state change where they can go out into nature and sort of look at something green or something like a flower and sort of stare at it and memorize it and connect with it. And that way it sort of brings them from this world of looking at, these certain colors and textures and death in a way, and go and look at something alive and healthy. And so we kind of shift back into the world of the living again.
I remember when I was there, one of the participants put flowers in the cadaver's armpit, to say thank you, and it was a female cadaver.
Was that at the end, kind of at the
Yes, on the
end
very
thing?
last day.
Yeah, again, we really find that rather than it be this cold class come in and go, we really want to sort of create that semblance of, I wouldn't say a funeral, but a way of sort of welcoming the cadaver into the class, experiencing that time with them, and then sort of closing that class at the end and closing that time with that cadaver. And so many of us, and it's different each time. It depends on the students and the sort of mentality of the students or the bent of that class. But oftentimes we will take flowers or something green from that, and we'll bring the cadavers into the middle of the classroom and place those things on them in the same way that you might do a funeral, because for us it's our way of sort of sending that body off, because we'll be done with it at that point. Those that body will be collected and cremated, and so it is sort of our second funeral for them. Most likely they had something like that when they passed with their own family, but we also had our own experience, at least with the form of that person. And so I think it's important for us to sort of close that for our own emotional connection to that as well.
So you could keep a body for anywhere from a few days to a few weeks to a few months.
It depends on the circumstances. We have a um, sort of contract up to a year to 2 years. It doesn't mean that we're using that body for that time. It just means that we may have that body for that amount of time, because we have a very specific season where we're busy. Summertime. Being in Colorado, we don't encourage a lot of outside groups traveling to here in the winter because they can get snowed out. And so summertime we're very busy, and so we are procuring donors throughout the year. I might procure somebody maybe in October, but I might not use them in a class until July of that following July. So then we'll use them during that time, and then it'll be processing time before we get them back to the funeral home and through that part of the process. So in general, it's about 6 to 8 months that we will have a body come through, uh, go through a class, and then get back to their family. But it can be extended depending upon timing.
And precautions, I remember the video that I had to watch before I came. And you chuckle, so tell us very quickly about some of the precautions that newcomers have to take, and even more seasoned, experts.
Well, we seasoned, heck, I'm as guilty as anybody of, talking with a scalpel in my hand, uh, as being, we've established my last name being Pulciani. I am Italian, and we do talk with our hands. And so, yeah, I think it's important for us to really establish a safety protocol. Many people, I think even surgeons and others, are used to, maybe handling sharp implements and these kind of things, which are certainly not used to handling them around a lot of other people. And so we take some time to really sort of explain, exactly how we would like you to handle the scalpels. They're very sharp. Carry them around. There's multiple people around, and so it's very important to create as good a practices as we can for keeping ourselves safe. We have a pretty good safety record. There's nicks here and there. It's usually somebody not following the exact rule, and with their scalpel, but those are few and far between.
Right. Excellent. Jim, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up this really interesting and informative interview?
Boy, we have covered the grounds that it comes from us. I think that the thing the mission or the story that we really want to put forward is really the value of cadaver study for anatomy, and the value of that from the basis of the basic anatomy study all the way through having repeat studies. So often for medical professionals, maybe they did some anatomy study, cadaver study when they were new students, and then they haven't been in the lab again. And they've been with live patients for 20 or 30 or 40 years, and when they come back to the lab with that knowledge, a base, and then relook at a new cadaver, it's absolutely life changing for them. They will all walk out of the lab with a renewed sense of understanding of anatomy and a renewed sense of connection to that, and it makes them better practitioners. And so, at a time where we do see places moving away from cadaver studies, getting anatomage tables, all those tools are great. We really, really want to push forward that story that there's really no way to understand anatomy but to look at a cadaver, because there's no such thing as average anatomy. There's only my anatomy and your anatomy and everybody else's anatomy. That's the only anatomy that's ever existed. And being able to look at, this body and then this body and then this body, and then make generalizations based on seeing multiple bodies is the best way to understand anatomy for any purpose, whether that's to be a practitioner or whether that's just to be somebody who lives in
Right.
one of these things. Yeah.
And when is the next workshop?
We have we actually have a workshop coming up in September. We have a 4-day coming up in September, and then I think we have already scheduled for two for next year. I'm not sure if they're on the calendar yet. I'm so remiss in this. I've been so busy handling all the other classes. I haven't even looked at what we have going on. I say, you go to the Institute for Anatomical, or it's anatomicalresearch.org, and our schedules and stuff are on there.
And your center is the only one of its kind in Colorado, or are there others like it?
We are really one of a few in the nation. There's only a handful of labs that are similar to ours. There is another one, Todd Garcia's lab, up in Boulder. They do something similar to what we do. I'm not sure how many open classes they have, or if their classes are all funneled through their own research, but I do know we're one of two here.
Excellent. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully, you'll get a lot of people into your next workshop and that it will be a success.
I hope to have you back in our next
All
workshop
right.
because I so enjoyed you last time.
Oh, thank you. Right. I'll try to get back as soon as I can. So thank you so much.